So you want to make sure that your turkey is defrosted. And the reason for that is the turkey is stuffed with the neck and the giblets. So if you have frozen turkey, it's a lot more difficult to work with. And on top of it, there's a giant ice ball in the middle. So once your turkey's been defrosted, it usually takes about 2 to 3 days in the refrigerator. Open it up, and then what you're going to do is you're going to drain out all this blood that's going to be sitting in the bag. A lot of it's just water from the ice that's in there. You want to remove the terrible auto popping thermometer that never works correctly, and you want to remove the neck, and that's going to be in the back cavity there. So that's the neck coming out, and in the front cavity here, where the neck would have been, usually they have a bag of giblets. So in the bag of giblets, you're going to have a liver, which is the top left there. To the right of that is the heart. Underneath that is the neck. And bottom left there is the gizzards. So we're actually going to use the neck, the gizzards, and the heart. You do not need the liver. You can just take that away. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the heart, the gizzards, and the neck to make our stock. And this is going to be the base of our gravy. So we're going to put that into a stock pot. And into the stock pot, we're going to cover it with about 2 quarts of water. We're going to use a lot of water here in the sense that we're going to reduce this down to about 2 cups of liquid. So we're going to put this liquid onto the stove, and we're going to simmer it for about 6 hours. But first, what we have to do is bring this all up to a boil. And once it comes to a boil, there's going to be a lot of scum on top. This is natural whenever you're making a broth. And what you want to do is you want to kind of skim some of that off with a spoon. And then we're going to reduce the heat down to a simmer. And we're going to simmer this for, like I said, about 6 hours. And after the first 45 minutes, we're going to add in vegetables. And these vegetables are going to come from our scraps from the vegetables that we were cutting for our stuffing. So once we add our vegetables to the stock, we're going to just keep reducing that until we get to about 2 cups. Once we're at 2 cups, we're going to take it out and we need to strain it. And once we have it strained, that's when we can start the idea to make our gravy. So to get ready to start our gravy, we want to start by cutting our parsley and our thyme. So taking our parsley, getting our leaves picked off from the stems, we can then give them a rough chop. And as well as with thyme, we want to take off the thyme leaves and give those a rough chop as well. Once we've done that, we can move on to getting our butter melted and using our flour to make a roux. So using your butter, you want to do equal parts butter and flour. So that means if you do a tablespoon of butter, you want to do a tablespoon of flour. So you want to make sure that you melt your butter in your pan, and then when you add your flour to it, you whisk your flour into the butter. And you want to cook this out maybe for about a minute or so. There are different levels of roux, but we're not going to get into that today. If you want to add garlic to your gravy, you'd want to add your garlic when it's just the butter in the pan, and you want to make sure that you cook the raw garlic flavor out, or else it's just going to taste like raw garlic and be really gross. So once you have the flour and the butter together, you need to cook that out, like I said, for like a minute or so. I like to add my herbs in, so that way they kind of toast a little bit. And then once that's all going, you need to pour your broth or your stock in increments, and you want to be whisking constantly, because what happens is if you don't whisk it in, it will get really clumpy. And when liquid is thickened with roux, when it boils, that's when it gets to its thickest point. So you always want to make sure that this returns to a boil. It also helps to cook out the flour flavor. So every increment I add, it gets clumpy, comes to a boil, I add more, comes to a boil, and it starts to kind of thin out. Now, once I've added enough liquid where I think it's at a point where it's thin enough, I return it to a boil to check it, and then I add more liquid if it's needed. Then, when that's all said and done, I season it and then taste my gravy to make sure that it's at a seasoned level that I like. And if you do mess up and you don't think it's thick enough or you added too much liquid, you can always make the roux in a separate pan and then whisk in the roux to the gravy. I don't recommend doing that as much, just because it's easier to add the liquid in increments to make sure you get your gravy to the right level. So don't be overzealous and just dump in all your stock, or else you're going to either have really thin gravy or you're going to have lumpy gravy. And it's always a good idea that once your gravy does come to a boil to let it kind of simmer, for a couple of minutes. Again, as you simmer, it's going to reduce, so it will thicken up as it simmers.